Hi, this is Dan Heisman. This is another of our YouTube videos to help you improve your chess game. I have a chess tip of the day every day on Twitter. I've done it for 11 years. I haven't made every single day, but 90% probably. So 11 years, that's like 4,000 days, 90%. So I have over 3,000 chess tips of the day at Dan Heisman on Twitter. And one of the ones I posted a couple of days ago was a blindfold game I played many years ago. And it got some interest, so I thought maybe I'd make it into a video. So this is a blindfold game that I played, and my opponent is rated in the 1200s. And I got 25 minutes for the game, he got 15. It was probably played at lunch at work, way back in the day. So let's take a look at this blindfold game that I played. All right, so I played e4, e5. Now, when someone plays blindfold, literally what's happening is they don't put a blindfold on his eyes. They sit him down so that he's facing away from the board. Now, some of the blindfold chess tournaments that they have recently, they give the grandmasters an empty board to stare at, and then they can move the pieces on the board even though there's no pieces. They can visualize where the pieces are in their mind, and then they move the piece on the board, and that's how they play the blindfold game. But in this case, I'm not even seeing an empty board, because at the time this game was played, we did have personal computers, but to give you an idea how long ago it was, we had things like Apple and Radio Shack TRS-80s, but we didn't have an IBM PC yet. Okay, so anyway, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, Ruy Lopez. When people ask me about learning openings, I often recommend the Ruy Lopez. I think I won more short games with the Ruy Lopez in simultaneous exhibitions than maybe in every other opening put together. It just lends itself to black doing something wrong. So here my opponent played the Berlin defense, knight f6, extremely popular today, not that popular then. I just think he wasn't as familiar with the main lines, but as you see, he'll transpose into one anyway. So I played castle, and these days, of course, the main line is something like knight takes e4, d4, knight d6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, e takes d5, knight f5, queen takes d8, king takes d8. And even though black can't castle, he has the bishop pair. And this was first really popularized by Kramnik against Kasparov in a world championship match. And Kasparov kept playing this position as white, figuring that he would do well because theory said that white was slightly better. And it ended up that Kasparov did not win one game with white, and he ended up losing that world championship match. So this is kind of called the Berlin Stone Wall. Okay, but that's not what my opponent played in this game. Let's go back to our game. In the game, my opponent was worried now that I would play bishop takes c6, d takes c6, knight takes e5. So the main line here, as I said, is to just take the pawn. So what he did is he wanted to overprotect this pawn, and the best way to do that is just play d6 and go into a Steinitz. He played the very awkward move, bishop d6. Now you might look at this and say, oh my goodness, this guy's a terrible player. You shouldn't block your center pawns with the bishop. But as you'll see, he'll play the rest of the opening pretty well. That's really his big, one big mistake early in the game. Okay, so I played rook e1. And the idea here, like in a lot of Ruy Lopez lines, is to play c3 and d4, so that when he captures back with the pawn, you can take with the pawn. Okay, and already I'm getting threats of tactics of playing d4, and if he takes, I can play e5 and fork his bishop and his knight. So he plays castle, and I think the computer here wants me to play d4. Let me check with Stockfish 12. I downloaded Stockfish 12. Supposed to be a lot stronger than Stockfish 11, not that it needs to be. Yeah, Stockfish 12 says d4 is almost already winning here. For instance, he can't play, obviously he can't take because of the fork, but there's no way he can kind of get around that. If he plays knight takes, then you play knight takes, and if he plays pawn takes, you fork anyway. So, for instance, if he counterattacks the rook, you can then hit the bishop and the knight, AWL, pawn takes, I'm hitting 2 pieces, and I'm winning one of them. So, he can't take it all. He would have to play something like rook e8. Stockfish says I should now play bishop takes, pawn takes, and bishop g5, if h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3. And now he still can't take because of e5, and I've got that pawn attacked 3 times, and he just can't keep guarding it. And Stockfish says I'm up about 1.5 pawns. All right, so again, back to the game. So after he castled, I played c3 to get ready to play d4. He plays a6. I play bishop a4. He plays b5. I play bishop b3. Sometimes people ask me, if you're going to put the bishop back on c2 when he attacks it with knight a5, why don't you just save a tempo and play bishop c2 right away? Well, the answer is the knight on a5 is a little bit awkward, and the bishop on b3 is a really good square, really good diagonal on the same line with his king. So you actually want to force him to move the knight to do that. So it's better in a lot of the lines to play bishop b3 first. Now here Stockfish says, in this particular position, bishop c2 is a little better, and he has white up by about 3/4 of a pawn. After bishop b3, which is what I played, he says white's still up by about 2/3 of a pawn, almost 3/4. All right, so bishop to b3. Why am I up more than a normal advantage? Because of this move bishop d6. So black, to his credit, now realizes that this is the piece that's kind of holding up his position, and he realizes when I play d4, he's going to have a problem. So he moves the bishop back to where it normally belongs, as bishop e7. So now we've transposed into a main opening position, except that black's down an entire tempo, because instead of putting the bishop on e7 right away, he's gone to d6 first and then to e7. So I'm up a tempo in a main line of the Ruy Lopez. So here I play d4. Black plays d6. Now the threat for black is to play bishop g4, then take the knight, and if white takes with the queen, that removes the guard on the d-pawn. So Stockfish says I can ignore that here and play knight bd2. I play h3, which is the normal kind of move. And my opponent plays bishop b7, which is the characteristic of the Zaitsev variation. If white wasn't up a tempo and black does this development, then this is called the Zaitsev variation. And there's some fantastically interesting games played with the Zaitsev variation in the Kasparov-Karpov World Championship matches, where Kasparov is playing white, Karpov's playing black, and basically Kasparov sacks his entire queenside to get a kingside attack, and he does this in a couple games, and they're just wonderful to play over. I forget exactly which match. It might have been the third or fourth match, where they had a lot of these Zaitsev games. Okay, so let's get back to our game. Bishop b7. I play knight bd2. The idea in the Ruy Lopez with knight bd2 is to play the knight to f1, and then to g3 or maybe e3, and then threaten to go to f5, try to make him play a move like g6, weaken his kingside, help with the kingside attack. White also wants to usually play a move like a4 to take advantage of these pawns that are pushed on the queen side to weaken the b5 square. Okay, black plays queen d7. Stockfish suggests that rook e8 is the best move. Plays queen d7. I continue with my plan with knight to f1. And black develops his rook a d8. So as you can see, black's playing some very reasonable moves here. As I said, he's down a tempo, but the problem is that white has a really good solid position with his c3, d4 center. Black cannot really open the lines with d5 that easily. And after my move knight g3, Stockfish says if both sides play perfectly, I'm probably winning here. So now my opponent plays g6 to keep my knight out of f5. Okay, so remember I'm playing blindfold here. So I'm now, by the way, if you put your knight on f5 when he has his pawn on g6, it's not always a blunder. In fact, in his book Pawn Power in Chess, Hans Kamak calls this idea of sacrificing the knight there to get into the king side, the Benoni jump. And I was aware of that. I read Pawn Power in Chess, more than 10 years before I played this game. So, and even though I was playing blindfolded, I was kind of keeping in mind that maybe the knight could get into f5 in some lines. All right, so here I played bishop h6, which is the number one move. And of course, all amateurs here are going to say bishops are worth 3, rooks are worth 5 using the Reinfeld values. I got to move the rook so I don't lose the exchange. Losing the exchange doesn't mean coming out behind in a trade. It means losing a rook for a bishop or a knight. But actually, if you use more sophisticated values, rooks are not worth 2 pawns more than bishops, maybe a pawn and 3/4, and the bishop pair is worth half a pawn. So if black gives up that rook for the bishop, he's only losing a pawn and a quarter. Well, you might say, well, why would you ever want to lose a pawn and a quarter anyway? And the answer is, well, you wouldn't. But in this particular case, the dark squares are weak around the black king. And if black has a dark squared bishop and white doesn't, then those squares are very difficult to attack. So actually here, Stockfish 12 wants to give up that rook for the bishop. It wants to play e takes d4 and allow white to play bishop takes f8. That's something you just won't see lower rated players do. They're deathly afraid to do something like that. And here, black's between a rock and a hard place anyway. It's not as if taking that pawn gives black a good game. It's just that it gives black the least disadvantage. So black plays rook e8. And now we get an interesting position where I can go after the f7 pawn, but I guess when I was blindfolded, I looked at this move knight g5, and I saw that he could play d5, and all heck would break out in the middle. And I really didn't feel like going through all that blindfolded when I only have 25 minutes for the whole game. So I said, let me just do something that's a little easier to play. Now Stockfish looks at this and says, oh, this is the best line for white. White should play queen f3. The chances of me finding that in a 25-minute blindfolded game are pretty slim, probably close to none. And now it says that white is up by 5.5 pawns. We can look at this line. Knight to a5 is best. D takes e5. Knight takes b3. A takes b3. D takes e4, hitting the queen. Knight on g takes e4. Bishop takes e4. Rook takes e4. So now the knight can't take on e4 because the queen takes f7 check and queen g7 mate, or queen h7 mate. So black has to play something like bishop f8. And now white can't take the knight because black will take the bishop. White could take the bishop first, but then the knight can take the rook. So therefore, Stockfish plays the Zwischenzug rook to d4, hitting the queen. And now if the queen moves, bishop takes bishop, followed by either queen takes or pawn takes knight. So Stockfish says here black should give up material with knight to d5. Bishop takes f8. Rook takes f8. Knight e4, threatening rook takes e5, d5, queen takes d5, knight f6 check, winning the queen. Queen e7. Rook takes d5. Rook takes d5, knight f6 check. And now Stockfish says actually black's best move is to take the knight, get the knight for the queen rather than letting the knight get the rook and then start a mating attack. Anyway, no way I would see any of that. Let's go back to the game. So knight g5 is the best move here. After the game, we looked at the game and we looked at bishop takes f7 check. And we decided this was winning. King takes f7. Now I could play knight g5 check, but more to the point is queen b3 check. And now if black plays d5, I can play d takes e5, hitting the knight. If the knight moves, Stockfish says knight h... Oh, wait. Did I play the wrong move? Interesting. Oh, Stockfish is now saying bishop f7 check is equal. So originally Stockfish was telling me that bishop f7 check was good, and I wrote down in my notes many years ago that bishop takes f7 check wins. But Stockfish is a lot better than our analysis in those days, so I was wrong. Bishop f7 check doesn't win. Queen b3 check is only equal. Let's look at that again. Queen b3 check. d5 is forced. D takes e5. Knight h5, best move. Knight takes h5. G takes h5. And Stockfish is even saying black might be slightly better now. Knight g5 check. Bishop takes g5. Bishop takes g5. Here comes that exchange sack coming up. Knight takes e5. Queen d1. D takes e4. Queen takes check. King g8. Bishop takes d8. Queen takes d8. Says it's equal. Alright, back to the game. So, I'm glad I didn't play that either. Alright, so knight g5 wins. Bishop takes f7 check. Does not win. Alright, so I simply played queen to d2. Putting more pressure on the weakened dark square complex on the king side. Black says, alright, let's get rid of that bishop with bishop f8. I play the best move according to Stockfish 12. Bishop takes f8. Rook takes f8. And now I stick my queen in on h6. And now I have ideas of playing knight g5 or knight f5. And it turns out even knight h5 works in some lines. Alright, so here black played knight a5 hitting my bishop, trying to get it off of this diagonal so that it can't participate in the attack. Stockfish says already I should play the Benoni jump. Knight f5. Let's take a look at that. Knight f5, best move. You might say, well, can't he just take it with a pawn? And the answer is, well, if he takes it with a pawn, I always have the following maneuver. Queen g5 check. He has to play king h8, only legal move. Queen takes f6 check, getting my piece back. King g8. And now I play knight h4, threatening to bring my knight into f5. And then that threatens two mates. Queen g7 mate and knight h6 mate. And there's not going to be any defense. Knight takes b3. Knight takes f5. He has to take with the queen. Queen takes f5. E takes f5. And now if he takes the rook, I believe I can just bring my rook up and over and it's mate. Let's see if that's right. Knight takes a1. Yep, rook e3 mate and 8. So Stockfish says he has to play knight d2. But then I have queen g5 check, picking up the knight. And I'm up 8 pawns. Okay, so knight f5, the Benoni jump. If he takes it, I win. What if he doesn't take it? Well, I'm threatening mate. So what could he do? If he plays knight to e8, then I play knight g5, threatening mate on h7. He can't bring the knight back to f6 because I have queen g7 mate. And he can't push the pawn to f6 because, guess what? I left that bishop on b3 where the knight could take it and he never had time to do it. So f6 is illegal. So that means knight g5 is just checkmating on the next move, no matter what move he plays. As I said, if he guards the mate on h7, I play here. So, checkmate. So that would have been the best move. Knight f5. You know, the more you see these kingside patterns, you know, it's not like when I'm playing blindfold here, I'm making up all these patterns for the first time. I've played many games where I have attacks like this, so I'm familiar with the patterns, and that's why experience is such a good teacher, and also why you read, you know, instructive anthology game books like Logical Chess Move by Move, or my book, The World's Most Instructive Amateur Game Book, or the McDonald series, starting with Chess, The Art of Logical Thinking. Ova has some books. Chess Master versus Chess Amateur. Giddens has some. Fred Wilson has a book, Simple Attacking Plans. These are all good instructive anthology books. I have a list on my website. If you go to danheisman.com, click on More on the right, and then look for recommended book lists. I've got lists for basic tactical books. I've got lists for instructive anthologies. Okay, so anyway, knight f5 would win. I saved the bishop with bishop c2. I'm still have a great position. He plays knight c4. Here I could play d takes e5. I played b3 and said bye-bye, Mr. Knight. Stockfish says he should play knight a3, but he's losing anyway. He plays knight b6. Now I've got the e-pawn attack twice, but I realized I had a good kingside attack, and I really didn't want to open up the center for his pieces because I'm trying to attack on the king side, so I want the center to stay stable for a while. And therefore I didn't win the pawn here, even though Stockfish says pawn takes, and now it doesn't want to win the pawn. It wants to do the Benoni jump again. I guess I could call this the Benoni jump knight blindfold game. All right, so in the game I played rook a d1, so that if I take, the pawn would be pinned and he can't take it back. Just trying to get him to move the queen out of the way, which he does, but he goes to the wrong square. He goes to e6. And now when I play knight g5, I'm going to win a tempo besides getting all these threats with the Benoni jump. Stockfish says the right move order is to play rook e3, so that when I move my knights up, if he takes the Benoni jump knight, I can move my rook to g3. I knew that idea, but I thought my move order was better. So I played knight g5. And he moved the queen back to e7. And now I played rook e3 blindfolded. So I get a lot of credit here. Stockfish 12, just to show you I'm not kidding. Stockfish 12 says rook e3 best move. There you go, right underneath the board. All right, and I was playing blindfold and I played rook e3. All right, so sometimes a blind squirrel catches an acorn or whatever. Okay, so he tries to get another knight over there, so if I remove the guard, he can replace it with a knight. I play the Benoni jump, knight f5, hitting the queen and threatening mate. He takes it off. I play rook g3, threatening discovered attacks with mate on g7, or he can't move the knight because I have mate on h7. Too many threats. He moves the king out of the way. Now I could immediately play knight takes h7. If he plays knight takes h7, I have queen g7 mate. And otherwise, I'm threatening a discovery. For instance, if he plays knight g4, now I can't play knight f6 check because knight takes h6. So I have to take the knight first. I want to take it with the rook, so I'm threatening mate and discovery. If I take it with the pawn, then I'm not threatening the... I'm threatening mate in a couple with the knight, but I'm not threatening queen g7. But he still has no defense even if I take it with the pawn. Taking with the rook is a faster mate, though. Okay, so that's the fastest win. I thought that I needed to sacrifice the rook for this knight first, so he couldn't when he takes with a knight, he couldn't bring the other knight over. That turns out to be untrue, so I misanalyzed the position. As I said, I'm playing blindfolded, but I saw that I was winning, so I took the e-pawn, which is completely winning, but it's not the fastest win. He takes back, and now I say, I think if I take off that knight, he has no defense. So I take the knight off to get rid of one of the defenders. And he takes with the rook, and now I do play knight takes h7. And now I have double threat of knight takes f6 mate and queen g7 mate, and he can't stop both. If he plays knight g4, again I can play rook takes g4, so that his knight can't take the queen, and if he takes the rook, checkmate. So in this position after knight takes h7, my opponent looked at the position for a while, didn't see any defense to the two mates, and he resigned. Okay, so that was a pretty good blindfold game. My opponent didn't play that badly. He messed up the opening with bishop d6, but he quickly got it back right. If you look at his position and compare it to the Zaitsev, here's the Zaitsev variation without the loss of tempo. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop d5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, d6, c3, castle, h3, bishop d7, d4. Zaitsev variation. So we reached this position in the game, except black was down a tempo because he put the bishop on d6 first, and then when he went to e7, And here it's black's move, but in the game it was white's move, and I played knight bd2. And that extra tempo means a lot in a lot of positions. So here Stockfish says that black is only down by 0.35, which is kind of a normal opening advantage, after rook e8, which is the normal move here. If we make it white's move, let's click a button here and make it white's move. Oh, I have to bring in the... let's turn on the... We're going to turn on the palette so I can do that. Okay, we'll make it white's move. So black's only down 0.32, but if I make it white's move and I play here, then white's advantage has grown from 0.32 to 0.8. Now, in openings, a tempo is worth about a third of a pawn, roughly. If you can get 3 tempos for a pawn in a gambit, that's about right, or 2 tempos plus some open lines. So here, and now Stockfish has my advantage is dropping to about 0.6. So that's almost perfect then. The difference between it being my move here and being black's move here is roughly that third of a pawn. So that's a good thing to remember, that in the opening, a tempo is worth a third of a pawn. Now, in a complicated position, a tempo could be worth a queen or more. For instance, suppose I give you the advantage that in a game I'll play you and you get an extra tempo at the start of the game. Like you can play white and you can play e4 and d4, and then from then on we'll play normally. Okay, well that's a nice advantage for one person, but it's not as big an advantage as like giving them a knight or something. But if you give them 2 moves at the start of the game, e4, d4. But now suppose they're a much weaker player, and instead of giving them an extra move at the start of the game, you give them an extra move anytime during the game that they want. Well, that's basically the equivalent of like giving them the queen, because, you know, let's make a couple moves here. Let's say black plays queen d7 and I play knight f1. He plays rook a d8. Well, if you give me an extra tempo here, I can play bishop e6, and then I can play bishop takes d7 and win the queen. So normally bishop e6 would be a crazy move, but if you get 2 moves in a row, it's not such a crazy move. So giving someone the odds of giving them 2 moves in a row at any point during the game, just once, they can't do it all the time, obviously, but you say at any point during the game you get 1 extra move, then it's not worth a third of a pawn anymore. Then it's worth like almost about a queen. So that's tremendously big odds. So if you have a friend of yours that's much, much weaker than yourself, you can offer them those odds. You can say, anytime during the game, you get 1 extra move. See if that makes it kind of even. All right, hopefully you enjoyed today's blindfold game. I'm Dan Heisman. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. We could use as many subscribers as we can. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Check out the rest of the channel. We got lots of fun stuff. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.